Rapi, a fig and raisin sauce, which is a pottage of dried fruit from a 14th century medieval manuscript. The original recipe called this rapi, and in the redaction from the medieval cookbook, it was called fig and raisin cream. The recipe comes from the manuscript Curé en English, which means cooking in English. Rapi is a sauce that was made up with something that was ground and then added over a meat. In this case, I was looking for a recipe to use up extra grapes from my garden and extra figs. The figs are ripening, and I need to start picking them before the birds eat them all. I have a little friend here to try to help me keep the birds away. But they're looking pretty good. See, this one's still a little firm, so it's getting yellow. It's not ripe yet. These are golden figs, so they don't turn black. Here's one that was almost ripe and got nibbled on by the birds. That one's getting a little sunburned. But I will pick some of the ripest ones. And we'll see about making another fig dish. Figs were a favorite fruit in Lent as a spicy, sweet snack. In this woodcut from the 15th century, in the center you can see some grapes growing on the grapevine, and above that are some fig trees. Rapi. Take half figs and half raisins. Pike them and wash them in water. Scald them in wine. Bray them in a mortar, and draw them through a strainer. Cast them in a pot, and therewith powder of pepper and other good powders. Lay it up with flour of rice, and color it with sundries. Salt it, seethe it, and mess it forth. In the recipe in the medieval cookbook called Fig and Raisin Cream, based on rapi, it used dried figs and raisins. The figs were soaked in water to soften them. The raisins weren't, however. The raisins and figs were then added together with wine and brought to a boil, and then down to a simmer. They were blended, in this case with a blender rather than a mortar, and then the spices were added to it, and rice flour was used as a thickener, which it didn't really need much because it was already a pretty thick paste. Food coloring could be added as well to adjust the color. Even though they were fresh, I still soaked the figs. There were about 400 grams of figs, and so I weighed out 400 grams of grapes. I drained the water from the figs and saved that to use with the rice flour. All of the grapes had to be picked from their stems and added in with the figs. Then I added the wine. I used about a half a bottle of red wine. That was enough to come up to the top of the figs and grapes. This I heated until boiling and then turned it down to a simmer. In the medieval manuscript, the fruit was pounded with a pestle in a mortar to grind it up and then pushed through a sieve to take out the chunks, leaving only a juice, which is why it needed to be thickened with the rice flour. Using a modern blender, it shreds everything up but makes the sauce thicker because the fragments aren't removed. The fig tree, indigenous to Western Asia, reached the Mediterranean in prehistoric times. In Egypt, it may have been cultivated as early as 4000 BC, and by 800 BC, it was grown in mainland Greece. Homer mentions figs, and so does the Bible. Fresh and dried figs were a staple in ancient Rome, where they were eaten raw or added to sweet and savory dishes. In medieval Europe, especially the Mediterranean, they were used in much the same way. Dried figs were the norm in Northern Europe, where they were an expensive import, associated especially with Lent. Medieval Arab physicians considered figs and grapes the best fruits. Classified as warm and moist, figs were thought to cleanse the stomach and give strength to the body, dried ones in particular. Fresh figs were said to be less nutritious and to create gas and bad humors. This recipe uses fresh figs and fresh grapes from my own garden. I poured the pureed sauce back into the pan to reheat it and use the rice flour to thicken it. The rice flour, I only used a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons because the sauce was already thick. I used the water that I soaked the figs in to mix with the rice flour, and then added this into the sauce to thicken it. Then I added the cinnamon and stirred it in, and then I added the salt. I also added some sugar, and then the original recipe calls for black pepper and other spices. In this case, I added the black pepper and some poudre forte, or strong powder. So maybe about a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and you can add that to taste to make it spicier if you wish. And the poudre forte, or strong powder, has some black pepper and long pepper and other medieval spices already in it. I have a recipe for making that on a different video. Although these sauces were originally intended to be poured over a meat dish, they could also be used on vegetables. And although this is not medieval, we are going to try it on some vanilla ice cream. But I'm going to try it on the vanilla ice cream as is. It's sweet, a little tart, has kind of the consistency of applesauce, especially with the cinnamon in it. It has sort of like a cinnamon applesauce flavor. The ice cream is really good with the sauce on top of it. The sauce itself could be used also for a filling. One of my previous recipes was a fig pastry that had phyllo dough and had figs inside of it, and rolled it up and deep fried. This sauce, maybe a little thicker, could be added as a filling for like a pastry type thing like that. The fig and grape flavors are not very strong in it. So it doesn't have strong flavor of one or the other. It just has sort of a fruity flavor. Again, maybe more like an applesauce flavor. Good way to use up extra fruit from the garden. The recipe called for dried figs and raisins, but I had fresh figs and fresh grapes from my garden, and so I adjusted the recipe to use those. Just like in the medieval days and even today, cooks would use the ingredients that they had at hand, not necessarily everything that the recipe called for.